Welcome, folks, to The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Every week, diving deep into the truth of Catholic social teaching and restoring all things in Christ.
The Uncommon Good is on the air. I'm Bo Bonner.
And I'm Dr. Bud Marr.
We're coming to you from these United States of America here in the smack dab middle of the country, Des Moines, Iowa, here on Iowa Catholic Radio, where Bud and I both work at Mercy College of Health Sciences. There, I am the Senior Advisor for Mission Initiatives and also Director of the Center for Human Flourishing. Bud, what do you do out at the old ball game?
Oh, I almost blanked there. I'm the Associate Provost, so I'm in Academic Affairs. I was like, do I teach now or...
I like the idea that, like, you're sitting there and, like, people are talking and then everyone looks at you and then you're like, oh, I'm the associate provost. I have to answer now.
Well, you know, having a name like Bud, you hear different derivations of things. And I've, like, associate provost, I'm called assistant provost. Some people still call me dean. So whatever title you want to give me.
Drovost.
I'll be there.
I like, yeah, you put it Drovost, yeah. Well, so people also should know that Mercy College of Health Sciences not only keeps us gainfully employed and allows us to come do this radio show during work hours, also they underwrite the show, Mercy College of Health Sciences, mchs.edu. Thank you for supporting the show. mchs.edu, a good way to go see what all you can do at Mercy College. As you've heard, hopefully you hear the sonorous voices of Bud and I throughout the day on on Iowa Catholic Radio talking about Mercy College and the various ways that people can hook into a profession, of course, but grounded in the Sisters of Mercy about care, healing, and really following Catherine McCauley, who followed Jesus Christ so well.
Yeah, this is all great stuff. This is kind of an off-the-wall thought, but last night when I was leaving campus, I was looking at our facade that's on, like, 6th Street, right near the interstate. I was kind of admiring it, like the disciples with the temple, where, I don't know, when I first came to Mercy College, it was a quaint little campus, and I liked it a lot. But I liked the display we have right near the interstate. That was a nice job. I leave town, you guys get all fancy.
That's right. Well, you know, we'll throw a shout out to Matt Romke out there, who does a lot with marketing and admissions. So many great people to work with, and we hope that you. Mercy wants you to consider being part of that group of people and being a community with us, mchs.edu. But one of the things that I think everyone this far north is dealing with is this snow is finally melting.
Yeah.
But we have one of our good friends who's been on the show, Tim O'Malley, was talking about Indiana, where they've gotten more snow recently, and the politics of whether you should clear off your sidewalk or not. And I wanted to give a shout-out. I don't know about your neighborhood, because you live out at Windsor Heights, where I think there's no sidewalks, but the sidewalks on the south side have been really clean, and I wanted to tip the hat of all the Des Moines neighbors for doing their part and making sure that a nice sidewalk is part of the common good, and keeping it clear of ice is a very easy way to begin being neighborly.
Yeah, I saw that Twitter exchange about the unshoveled sidewalks in South Bend, Indiana. And I guess growing up, I always thought it was the law to remove the snow. But it sounded like it's enforced differently in different cities. But maybe I'm just nervous about what my neighbors will think about me. But we try to get out there pretty quickly and shovel. It stops right at our yard. So the sidewalk crosses in front of our yard. But when you're talking about Windsor Heights not having sidewalks, like the rest of the street does not. And it is a political fight each election cycle.
Yeah, see, this is funny because you have to live this far north for this to be a part of common good politics. In Oklahoma, if there's snow on a sidewalk, kids are just rolling in it because it doesn't happen all that much. Well, folks, we're, of course, going to keep on keeping on with our series about leadership and the common good. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to continue on some of our talk. We're talking about fragility and anti-fragility. We're going to add a new term from our buddy Nassim Nicholas Taleb about skin in the game. So we're going to talk about skin in the game and sacrificial leadership today. You will really want to stick around and listen to it. I think I think it's been great stuff so far, if I do say so myself. But I think putting meat on the bones of what we've really been setting up, and hopefully you get a chance to stick around and listen to all of it. This is Bo Bonner, Dr. Bud Marr, The Uncommon Good here on Iowa Catholic Radio. Stick around. We'll be back right after this.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio is provided by Skeffington's Formalware, in business since 1951, with locations in Des Moines, West Des Moines, Coralville, and Ankeny. Skeffington's Formalware, fitting you for life celebrations. Online at skeffingtons.com.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio provided by Mercy College of Health Sciences, where you can chart your course for more.
They provide unparalleled clinical rotations, hands-on learning, accelerated education, and flexible schedules, all part of the Mercy College experience.
Learn more at mchs.edu.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio comes from Rick Schaefer of Sullivan Auctioneers, LLC, conducting professional full-service auctions for farmland and farm machinery since 1979. And Sullivan Land Company Real Estate Brokerage, 515-313-5508. SullivanAuctioneers.com.
Thank you, Caldwell Parish, for underwriting Iowa Catholic Radio. Conform to the wishes of the deceased and to Catholic liturgical burial traditions. Caldwell Parish Funeral Home, Des Moines' only Catholic-owned and operated funeral home. CaldwellParish.com.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio is provided by Ashworth Vision Clinic. Complete eye exams, contact lenses, glasses, glaucoma testing, and pre- and post-operative care. 515-440-4610. AshworthVision.com.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio provided by Blessman International. According to a global food security report, more than 820 million people in the world are hungry today. None of us can help them all, but how about one? One child. Blessman International provides 60,000 children in South Africa with a daily hot meal, place of safety, educational experience, and spiritual development. Learn more at blessmaninternational.org. That's blessmaninternational.org. Thank you, Blessman International, for your support of Iowa Catholic Radio.
Back with the Uncommon Good, Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this Wednesday. Thank you for listening to the show. It's wonderful to have you all with us. So we're going to continue on our series here on leadership, the difference that imitating Christ in leadership makes. Leadership, how it has to do with the common good, Catholic social teaching, and everything like that. So last week, Bud, we introduced one of the authors that we have people in our class when we've taught it read, Nassim Nicholas Taleb. I always like to point out to people that to use him well is not to necessarily endorse every single thing the man has ever said. He's kind of a wily character, part of why I like him. But I do think I'm going to imitate him in another way. He's pretty good about looking at very different sources and sort of gleaning what he thinks is useful and not sweating too much, whether he's like, fully on board with what everybody in that field thinks about, from math to medicine to philosophers. So we're very much not saying is that people need to go out and become Taleb disciples, but he has very intriguing ideas that I think are worth wrestling with, and also gives a sort of tangible direction of what we're saying here. So last week, we talked about how what you really want is not to just be resilient. You want to be anti-fragile, which means you actually grow and become better when you face difficulties, stresses, and risks. What you don't want to be is fragile, which means that you're optimized and over-efficient for just a certain circumstance, and when things change, everything falls apart. We've all lived the last 2 years of an economy, a worldwide economy, that was beyond fragile, which of course didn't mean that it's not powerful. Maybe the most powerful economy of all time, but extremely fragile because it was extremely efficient. All it took was one virus to sort of upturn the entire thing. So how do we make people anti-fragile? Well, Bud, today what we want to talk about is how is it that leaders can make people fragile, and how do we as Christian leaders not only prevent that, but in our own person provide a different path. So let's explore that. What happens when people become fragile? What are leaders doing when they quote unquote fragilize others?
Well, as you've mentioned on the show previously, I believe, part of it is unloading risk on other people, and usually for the sake of your own gain. So one prominent example that Taleb mentions, which I think is just indicative of fragile cultures and also in some ways exploitative cultures, is what led to the 2008 economic collapse. As we know, mortgage lending played a huge role in that collapse, and it's fascinating, but also in a sense sort of horrifying. Right before the collapse, we have emails from, folks who were in finance where they saw what was coming in some sense. They knew what was being done was unsustainable, but sent messages to each other saying, well, when the poo hits the fan, we'll be in Tahiti or wherever, we talk in finance or like large business of the idea of a golden parachute. That's specifically anti-fragility. It's lacking skin in the game where there are these various risks involved. But if things go wrong, you'll be the last person who is going to be impacted negatively in any way.
Yeah, and you actually, that's exactly the term that Taleb uses, is in order to prevent this willingness to offload risk on others and to benefit from their risk while you take none, the opposite of that is skin in the game. Mm-hmm. And, I don't know if he sort of absorbed a sort of wider cultural, meme or whatever. Skin in the game has become a lot more prevalent just in discourse now. But what he points out is this idea that people who lead have to, so to speak, put themselves under the same risk that they're willing to put other people on. So one of his famous examples is from the Code of Hammurabi, actually, that if you were someone who built a large work or a building, that you had to live on the bottom floor. So the idea is you wouldn't build a building that you thought was going to collapse. And so you're right, the sort of opposite of a golden parachute, where the idea is no matter what happens, if everything goes bad, I hit the ejection button and I get out safely, and not only safely, but actually better than what I was in the sort of boat or whatever. What skin in the game is saying is, I will put myself on the first floor of the risk I expect other people's to take. And that this is what we start meaning when we're talking about sacrificial leadership.
Yeah, I haven't looked too much into the origins of that phrase, but I wonder if it's connected in some ways, not to get too nitty-gritty early in the morning, with the ancient practice of circumcision. You know, when people were called into the family of God, it's one thing to say like, oh, sure, I'll sign up, show me the dotted line. But to literally have skin in the game is a whole different level of commitment. So this kind of discussion goes way back. And Bo, I think the greater your power is, not to be like channeling Spider-Man or anything, but the greater your power is, the more pressing this question becomes. So we think about the example of King David in the Bible, and when he has his great fall with, the adulterous act with Bathsheba, later murdering her husband, what precipitates it all is that while the rest of the troops are at war, like he's at home, enjoying, relaxing, etc. And you can take that sort of imagery and transport it all the way to today. Like, think about how differently our leaders, our politicians might think about war if they were sending their own children. They rarely are, right? And so, I mean, that, again, skin in the game, that sort of just transforms the way that we think about the decisions that have to be made.
Absolutely. And in fact, the martial imagery, Taleb brings this up, that, he goes, used to kings died on the battlefield because they were in the war with their troops. And so progressively through time, he says, you start to see that leaders extricate themselves from the most violent risks, the most difficult risks, right? So they don't put forward their lives in battle. They don't put forward their treasure, right? That in many ways what leadership tries to do at its most negative, and we see a lot of this, is how to make sure that my risk is limited when I'm leading other people rather than putting myself fully in. I think that the point about circumcision is very specifically what he's channeling, because this, of course, channels sacrifice, which in the next episode we'll really get into this. But yeah, so why is it that covenants have to be sealed in blood? And there is, of course, the symbolic power of saying, I am putting life itself on the line to do whatever we're talking about. Now, of course, Bud, the analog of this, skin in the game, is, of course, the incarnation of Jesus Christ. Yeah. So when God wanted to come lead and save his people, he's God. He doesn't need to, he can stay in heaven and direct all things. But as a sort of like overabundance of showing that God has skin in the game. Now, I want to head off anybody who say this. Of course, theologically, we're not saying that God could suffer or die. Like, there is no risk for God because he's God. But even still, God became incarnate to show he is willing to literally take on skin, to become flesh and bone, and take the risk of death and the world full of sin with us. That the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ is the ultimate act of skin in the game, and that's the sacrificial leadership that Christianity must demand of its leaders.
Yeah, and we could have a whole question about how the Catholic Church and its own leadership has done with this sort of thing. But you see this in a lot of the symbolism of the church, where the Pope, who's, in some ways, he has the highest authority in the church, he's called the servant of the servants of God. When bishops are made cardinals, like they take on red vestments, they receive the pallium, which is symbolic of like a sheep being slaughtered. And so there are ways that the church has developed practices to push their own leaders towards this, right? And I think if we want to talk about transforming our own lives or making, like building organizations that are driven by servant leadership, like this could be like a topic of conversation that's completely put on the front burner. And, there's all sorts of ways that I think we overlook it. As we're talking this morning, my mind is going to, like our way of life at the college. In what ways are the leaders pressed to take on, not only the kind of risk, but the sort of like day-to-day activities or lives of those who are, so to speak, on the front lines. And if your organization doesn't have that dynamic, well, I guess what I'll think about is like the difference between, say, like even a grocery store that's a cooperative versus a business that's primarily beholden to its shareholders. And think about just like that organizational structure, how it will, like the kinds of questions that raise, how those will be approached differently.
Well, I even think the act of teaching, right, which is something where you and I probably have the most experience as being a leader, right? Like teachers, no matter what they are leaders. But what is interesting, right, is education, when it's truly education, is about a mutual risk in the classroom, that a professor opens themselves up with the students to learn. Because the opposite way is to have no risk, right? And to think of the classroom as sort of like a production line, right? So like on the big old conveyor belt, the students come in, they're empty-headed, we fill them with knowledge like they're an empty receptacle, and they go on, and no risk is taken. Education to truly be transformative must be a risk, right? The risk of being misunderstood, the risk of nothing really being pulled off, the risk of being vulnerable to teach, the risk for teachers to learn while they're teaching in order to embody and show what that looks like. That's skin in the game. And students know this. Students know when a teacher is just clocking in for a job, or when they think that they're just students are passive recipients of knowledge, and they know teachers that are willing to put skin in the game, to put their heart on the line and their mind on the line. And this is the risk of education, but this is skin in the game in education. The most important thing for a teacher to do is to admit that. Mm-hmm. And, we're coming up on the break. We'll talk about this a bit more because there's very practical ideas about making sure you don't fragilize people, but also that you don't offload risk onto them as well. And we'll finish up this episode talking about that. Stick around. This is The Uncommon Good, and we'll be back right after this.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio is provided by CTO. Your support has helped thousands of students attend our Catholic schools. CTOIowa.org. At CTO, the bottom line, it's for the kids and their future.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio is provided by Marr Security, a Catholic-owned family business providing security solutions for homes and businesses since 1953. PerMarrsecurity.com, 515-244-5660.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio is provided by Bozen the Florist. Valentine's Day, Mother's Day, weddings, whatever the message, say more with Bozen. Bozen.com, 515-244-ROSE. Bozen makes the moment mean more. Support for Iowa Catholic Radio provided by Bell Construction.
Bell Construction is a roofing company. They specialize in residential re-roofs, like commercial jobs, and have the experience to meet all of your roofing needs with personal service. With Bell Construction, the owner will come to your home or place of business in person to inspect and ensure the quality of work that you deserve. They pride themselves in working with you on a personal basis and making sure you are satisfied. Bell Construction, 515-963-4494. Bell Construction.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio is provided by Catholic Charities, where exceptional service is a hallmark in caring for those with essential needs, including food pantry, professional counseling, emergency family shelter, and refugee services. CatholicCharitiesDM.org.
Iowa Catholic Radio would like to thank our business partner, Fast Signs. Learn more about their signs, digital signs, banners, and other products and services at fastsigns.com or 515-224-1210.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio is provided by Golden Rule Heating and Cooling. Since 1999, Golden Rule Heating and Cooling has been supporting customers with their rules to live by: respect, understanding, loyalty, expertise, and service. GoldenRulePHC.com.
Back with the Uncommon Good, Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this Wednesday. Thank you for listening to the show. So we're finishing up our talk today about skin in the game when it comes to sacrificial leadership. We just got done pointing out that sacrificial leaders with skin in the game take the risk with the people that they're asking risks of. And that to fragilize people, of course, is to offload that risk onto them. Now, Bud, that can sure sound like what we're saying is leaders should do stuff for people, or maybe people would misunderstand and think we're talking about maybe like a helicopter parent sort of model, but it's actually quite different. Like, people need to hear, take the risk with their people, not prevent risk. Because, of course, the big deal is if you put off risk now, you're just compounding it to some later date when it's going to be a very bad risk to take.
Yeah, that's huge in parenting, and I like how you set up as a contrast the helicopter parent idea. I think that's really the virtue of sports when they're approached rightly, is that we put our children sort of in a controlled environment where there is going to be risk, there is going to be challenge. They also learn that reality doesn't always just like work in their favor, that, you bump up against the world, you bump up against other people. So you learn to deal with, loss in some ways are like disappointment. But it's not yet the kind of risk that they might face in this, so to speak, real world. This all ties into, you mentioned earlier, teaching at the college. Man, I haven't done it, of course, but in conversations with our nursing students and nursing profs, like that's a real master craft. And there's a way to do it very well. There's a way to do it poorly. And I think doing it very well is along the lines of what we're talking about. The best teachers that I've met in this field, like they've spent years practicing themselves. They're, like I've said, like they're still on the front lines where they're willing to, like with preceptorships and clinicals, like to step in and to treat patients alongside their students. But they're also not going to coddle them to the point where, like at some point, the student has to, I'm afraid to use medical terminology because I'll probably get it wrong. But
nice.
Like, insert the needle, draw the blood, administer the medication, etc. And so this all ties into what Taleb admonishes us to practice.
And see, the thing is the impulse to sort of take risk away from our kids actually is because we don't want to take the risk of seeing them fail.
Yeah.
So we're like putting it off. We're like, well, I don't want to go through that, so I won't make them go through that. But the problem is risk never truly goes away. It compounds somewhere else. And so someday your child is going to have to face a big risk, a big difficulty, a big failure. And if they have no practice dealing with those things, those difficulties, when it's going to finally happen, they're going to have no practice and no sort of native ability to deal with it. And this is why our sort of, so a lot of people think that the problem with leaders is, of course, golden parachutes and speaking from above and being authoritarian. Absolutely true. But of course, vice is in two directions. So that's one direction. But the other is the modern leader who hates conflict, who doesn't want to cause any stir any pots. And so they just put off, they kick the can. And when the can finally comes, it's like an asteroid hurling towards Earth. And people are going to have no practice dealing with it. Skin in the game means that you carry that risk along the way so that people can be prepared when that time comes to make the sacrifice, which is what we will talk about next week. This is the Uncommon Good. May Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, reign in our hearts, our family, our city, our state, our nation, world, solar system, galaxy, the whole kit and caboodle. This is the Uncommon Good, and we'll be back next week. But if folks want to be a part of the prayer life here at Iowa Catholic Radio, what are easy ways for them to do so?
Yeah, please join us in prayer. We pray the Rosary on air at 6 a.m., later in the day at 10 a.m. That can be followed by Mass. And then at 2:55 p.m., the Divine Mercy Chaplet. You can also pray the Rosary anytime, anywhere, using the Iowa Catholic Radio app.
And speaking of the Iowa Catholic Radio app, there's many ways to keep in touch with us here in Iowa Catholic Radio, what we're doing on air and in the studio. You can go to the Iowa Catholic Radio app, download it at anywhere that you have data, listen live. and then interact in all those ways that we were talking about. You can also look at the original website, iowacatholicradio.com, listen live, donate, check out pictures of people if you really wanted to see them. You can also go on Facebook, just friend us, Iowa Catholic Radio, and then you can also follow our tweets at IA Catholic Radio and we'll see the tweets that we've been up to. What we're doing around the diocese, the Eucharistic Miracles of the World display can be viewed at the Basilica of St. John February 8th through 23rd. The next Man Up Power Lunch is Friday, February 11th at noon at St. Francis of Assisi Parish with Matt Wilkham. And again, go online to find out more about that. We have Scotty McCreary and special guest Ali Colleen at the Iowa Event Center Ballroom July 24th. And then, of course, we have the Spring Carathon coming up February 21st. This mission doesn't occur without you. We covet your prayers and, of course, your volunteer help, but also make sure to consider the material ways in which you make this possible through your donations. And as I said, you can donate on all of our social media. But you can also call 515-223-1150 or text that as well. And again, please consider donating during Carathon coming up February 21st. Well, Bud, a wonderful day. Blessings on putting skin in the game wherever it comes up, as you're going about your merry way as a leader.
Yeah, country music in late July sounds pretty nice right now, but I'm going to be patient and walk through February with appropriate patience.
That's right. Right now, it's in Bud's headphones. It's mostly German techno, Kraftwerk. That's appropriately cold. No, I'm joking.
Did you see that video about February that has been circulated?
Yeah.
I wonder if we'll have that guy on the show.
I felt shots fired at me because I love February, and of course it's like my birthday, and I love cold weather. But the guy, admittedly, very hilarious.
Okay.
Well, this is The Uncommon Good, folks. God bless, and we'll see you next week.
The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr is heard every week on wonderful Catholic stations like this one, and anytime on podcast. Just search for The Uncommon Good.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and The Uncommon Good provided by Mercy College of Health Sciences. Learn more at mchs.edu.